You ever hear a story like this? A country's entire national shipping fleet, it just vanishes. I'm not talking about a war or some huge disaster. I mean, it disappears right off the books. Today, we're unpacking the wild story of how Sri Lanka's maritime pride went from being a global force to basically zero, and then how it came back in a way that nobody saw coming. All right, let's get into it.
So, yeah, that's the big question, right? It's the central mystery we're going to solve. It's a story that has a little bit of everything: economics, politics, and just the tough realities of the modern world. How on earth does an entire fleet, a cornerstone of a nation's identity, just get wiped off the map? You're going to want to stick around because the answer is pretty incredible. But look, before we even touch the numbers and the strategy, you gotta understand what these ships really meant. This was never just a bunch of metal floating on the ocean. The Ceylon Shipping Corporation, or CSC, was this huge symbol of independence, of national pride for Sri Lanka. Seeing those ships with their flag in ports all over the world, that meant something deep. Okay, so to really get how it all came apart, we have to go back to the good old days. Let's start at the beginning, when Sri Lanka was a real power on the seas. 17. Just let that number sink in. At its absolute peak back in the 1980s, the CSC had this really impressive fleet of 17 different ships. I mean, these things were everywhere, from Europe to Australia. They were a legitimate global presence. And what's so wild is just how advanced this fleet was for its time. I mean, just look at the mix here: liners, container ships, even an oil tanker. This was a really well thought out, diversified operation. And the CSC wasn't just playing catch up, it was actually a pioneer. It was the very first South Asian carrier to run a container service to Europe. This was way more than just pride. It was a critical strategic asset that basically guaranteed Sri Lankan exports could get anywhere in the world. But you know, as any sailor will tell you, calm seas never last. And there was a perfect storm brewing on the horizon, a mix of new government policies and harsh economic realities. And it was headed straight for the CSC. This timeline right here, it lays it all out for us perfectly. You can see its birth in 71, that golden age in the 80s, and then boom, 1990. That's the turning point. A single policy decision changed absolutely everything. And it started a slow decline that ended with the very last original ship being sold off in 2012. So what was this huge change? Well, in a word, liberalization. See, before 1990, the CSC was operating in what you'd call a captive market. The government basically handed it cargo, protecting it from any real competition. It was like playing on easy mode. But after 1990, that protection was gone. Suddenly, this national carrier had to go head-to-head with these massive, super efficient global shipping companies. The rules of the game had totally changed overnight. And throwing them into this new cutthroat world, well, it revealed a huge problem that had been hiding just below the surface for years. The ships themselves. They were getting old, they were expensive to run, and frankly, they were becoming obsolete. It really boiled down to these three big killers that basically sealed the fleet's fate. First, a lot of the ships were just beyond economical repair. Second, their old engines were total fuel guzzlers, which is a disaster when fuel costs are rising. And third, they were just too small. They couldn't compete with the new generation of giant ships and automated megaports. So this term, beyond economical repair, or BER, what does that actually mean? Well, it's a pretty simple and kind of brutal calculation. It's that point of no return where the cost to fix something is actually more than the thing is even worth or could ever earn back. For any business, that's a death sentence for a piece of equipment. In this case, it was a death sentence for a ship. Now, it's easy to look at this and just see a tragedy, right? A national project that failed. But what if that's not the whole story? What if we look at it from a totally different angle? Could it have been a painful but necessary economic sacrifice? Because look at it from a pure taxpayer perspective. The argument here is that keeping these old, money-losing ships running just for the sake of national pride would have been a terrible financial move. It would mean the public footing the bill for yet another failing state-owned company in a country that already had about 400 of them. From this point of view, selling the fleet wasn't a failure at all. It was the only responsible thing to do. And, we could just end the story right there as a sad tale of decline, a cautionary tale. But if you did that, you would miss the entire point. This is not just a story about loss. Seriously, what happens next is the most important part of this whole thing, so stick with me. Because after totally bottoming out, for years it was a shipping company with no ships, the CSC was reborn, and it came back as something completely different, something smarter, leaner, and way more specialized. From 17 ships down to just 2. This is the new fleet. But hold on. Don't let that small number fool you for a second. This is not a story of failure. It's a story of brilliant strategic reinvention. The focus shifted from sheer size to laser-focused specialization. This chart right here, it explains the entire genius of their comeback. The old fleet tried to be everything to everyone, a global liner service, and it got crushed by the competition. The new fleet, it's the exact opposite. It's a specialized bulk carrier that serves one single guaranteed customer. They didn't just find a new market, they were smart enough to create their own modern version of that old captive market. So these 2 new ships, the Ceylon Breeze and the Ceylon Princess, they have one very specific job: haul coal for one specific power station. That's a guaranteed contract. But here's the really brilliant part. During the monsoon season, when they can't do that job, they get chartered out on the international market, earning valuable foreign currency. It's a lean, smart, and incredibly resilient business model. So, after all that, what's the big takeaway from this whole saga? This journey from 17 ships to 0 and then back to 2, it holds a really powerful lesson about what it takes to survive in today's economy. So when you boil it all down, what's the ultimate lesson here? It's a principle that's true for any business, anywhere in the world. The crucial point is that market reality will always, always trump national pride. The CSC survived not because they held on to the past, but because they took a cold, hard look at the world and completely reinvented themselves to win. In global business, nostalgia just doesn't pay the bills. So let's circle all the way back to that question we started with. Did that 17-ship fleet just disappear? And now we know the answer. No, it didn't vanish. It transformed. It had to shed its old, heavy skin to evolve into something smaller, tougher, and a whole lot smarter. Something built to survive in the world we live in today, not the world of yesterday. And that's our deep dive on the Ceylon Shipping Corporation. I really want to thank you for joining me on this one. For more explainers that look at the big forces shaping our world, make sure you come back and visit us at King's Academy. So what's your take? Was getting rid of that old fleet a tragic loss of national identity? Or was it a brilliant move for economic survival? I'd love to know what you think, so drop a comment below. As always, we read every single one and we'll reply. Thanks for watching.